Hello guys! Have you been guessing where you can get the best movie recap? Well, it's here on Riveted. An autistic father tries to unite with his daughter after being convicted of death penalty. Welcome everyone, and so today, we will be revisiting the most underrated and unheard film called Miracle in Cell Number 7. To understand the cinematic accomplishment and the limitless possibilities that storytelling provides us. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe the video so that you can stay up to date to our latest video. The film is a Turkish remake of the Korean classic movie and sets in with the girl wearing a white bridal dress doing makeup, while suddenly gets attentive to the news playing on the TV that the capital punishment has been abolished by the government. This leads her to reflect on the memories she was occupied with in front of a mirror while holding a small box as she was about to travel in time to revisit the miracle that has shaped her life. We end up in a classroom where a little girl, Ova, was being awarded a red ribbon for her exceptional performance by her teacher. While outside the school, a guy was standing under the shade of a tree playing with his silhouette on the ground. As the bell rang, Ova came outside with other class fellows and runs towards the same guy. They hugged each other tightly while Ova reveals that she has been awarded the red ribbon while his classmate starts making fun of his father, calling him crazy till her teacher intervened and stopped them. On their way home, Ova and his father Mimo stops at a shop where Ova was excited to see the Heidi backpack and Mimo takes out the money, but the shopkeeper revealed that it cost $400. Ova was disappointed a little, while the shopkeeper advises Mimo to take the bag and pay the rest when he can. But Mimo turned down the offer as it was against the teaching of his grandmother. But Mimo promises Ova that he will make candy apples to sell at the parade tomorrow, and therefore would be able to buy the backpack. In the evening, when Mimo was herding his sheep to behave, Ova was sitting with her grandmother looking at his father and asking her what she had been told again and again to get her grandmother's confirmation. Ova asked if his father Mimo is crazy, but the grandmother immediately snubbed her and explains that his father is a little different from the rest because he is the same age as Ova. She instantly understands and overwhelmed with joy as she feels very fortunate to have been blessed with a lifelong friend in his father Mimo. But she didn't know that her luck is soon going to test her the very next day. In order to fulfill his promise, Mimo made the apple candy with the help of his grandmother, while carries Ova to the parade. As the parade started, Ova joins her school and started marching, but amidst the celebration and festivities, a soldier about to come to the parade with his battalion stops at a road to tie his shoelaces and immediately runs in the bushes as soon as his battalion marched away. But Mimo was fixated selling all his apple candies while enjoying the march past of her daughter Ova. After the parade, they went to the same shop with all the money earned to buy the Heidi backpack, but it was already sold to another girl, Sita, standing with his father in a military uniform. The shopkeeper tries to console Ova that he will get another backpack within a few days, but Mimo keeps insisting the military offer to let them buy the bag. But the officer turned him down, but Mimo starts following them, requesting and begging while the officer slapped and pushed him away. They arrived home with disappointment, but the grandmother tried to console Ova, who was not sad due to the backpack. Instead, she was pissed as Sita's father beat Mimo. The grandmother sat beside Mimo and hugs him tightly and inquired if he is fine, but he was also concerned with Ova's happiness instead of his insult. The grandmother assures Mimo to be grateful that he possesses a good heart, so don't let it corrupt by the harshness of others. She advised Mimo to forget and herd the sheep. Mimo was busy herding his sheep when few kids playing with each other start circling around him while making fun of him till all of them called away for lunch by their parents except Sita. She recognizes Mimo and showed her backpack to him while starts running away for Mimo to catch him. But Mimo was slow and unable to understand as he starts following her happily till she reaches near to a cliff while Mimo suddenly realizes and tries to warn Sita, but she misconstrued and fell off the cliff accidentally in the ocean. Mimo immediately jumps in the water while the other kids join their parents for lunch. Sita's mother was concerned as she couldn't find her daughter among the other kids. But one of the kids mentioned that she was playing with a crazy and that's when she got worried and asked her husband to find her. As soon as Sita's father reaches the shores, he finds Mimo holding her dead daughter coming out from the ocean. He broke down in tears and wasn't able to control the pain he was going through, along with her wife, who started screaming in pain while Mimo was overwhelmed with sadness. But Sita's father recognized Mimo and assumed that Mimo must have killed her due to the backpack he was demanding earlier at the shop. He took out his gun and fires, but missed, while the other officers at the scene hold down the military general. Mimo was immediately thrown into a dark interrogation room and was beaten heavily to sign the confession, but he refused. The officers forcefully take his thumb impression on the written confession while he tries to convince his innocence, but they decided not to listen to anything except his screams, which were resonating in the hallway where the military general was smoking his cigarettes. The news of Mimo's arrest reached to his grandmother and daughter Ova, who immediately showed up at the station, but they were turned down to visit him personally by the guards as he was drowned and killed a little girl. But as soon as the sun was set, Ova was able to stop the truck carrying his father Mimo, but was not able to see his face as soldiers took her away. But she remained resilient and ran a long way behind the truck, calling them to stop. But they didn't listen to her cries, except Mimo, who replied to Ova that the one-eyed giant saw it. Ova was immediately taken aback, and she was laying on the grass with his father Mimo, who was showing the animals in the clouds. And then she pointed out to the nearby abandoned ruins, and after thinking for some time, Mimo called them the one-eyed giant. Inside the cave, the same deserted soldier was changing his clothes and hiding his military uniform under the stones in the cave. The truck carrying Mimo arrived at the jail while he was lined up with the rest of the new inmates. The warden arrived to welcome the new prisoners, but he finds another military officer standing, holding a letter in his hand. The officer hands over the letter to the warden and reveals special instructions for a particular prisoner, but the warden turned them down. The officer ignored him and called out Mimo's name, and as he raises his hand in the air, the officer started beating him against the truck while the warden separated him from Mimo and assured the officer that he will be our responsibility from now onwards. The officer left while the warden became curious as to why Mimo received the beating, so he inquired his subordinate about the charges against Mimo and learned that he has killed the general's daughter. The warden also became nervous and advises his colleague to not let other prisoners get a wind of this as it will endanger his life, but it was already too late. Whereas Ova managed to find the deserted officer in the cave who witnessed the accident of Sita and assured to testify the truth in front of everyone, while she happily leaves to bring her grandmother. But when she arrived back with her grandmother, the officer already left the cave while not only playing with Ova's innocence, but also taking away her hopes. While Mimo was struggling to adjust to this new reality in the prison, he was put into cell number 7 where the guard tipped off the leader of the cell that he committed an unspeakable act of killing a little girl. This news riled up every other inmate in the cell and they beat Mimo in the bathroom till every bone in his body ached in pain. The doctor advises the warden to let Mimo rest at the infirmary for a few days so that he can heal, but the military officer Farouk immediately receives a call from the commander with new instructions that no one should interfere with his revenge, and if anyone repeats the same mistake, then he should be introduced to the consequences. In the cell, an old inmate is occupied with guilt while looking at a stain on the wall and smoking a cigarette to exhale some pain. His attention was disrupted by the noise in the cell while another new inmate, Sinjez, who arrived with Mimo, approaches the inmate's leader, Askarozlu, and asked him a favor to smuggle his music instrument, baglama. Askarozlu immediately accepted to establish his authority and influence in the prison. But soon he was realized that the real authority and influence lies entirely somewhere else as Farouk, who thrashed Mimo at the instructions of the commander, immediately arrived in cell number 7 with his guards and threatened everyone to not touch a single hair of Mimo's, as he will only be here for a few days till he receives capital punishment for killing the general's daughter. And whosoever denies cooperating will be dealt strictly and swiftly. Ova was struggling to deal with the loss of her father, and that's why she started visiting the cave every day to find the man who witnessed everything. While Mimo was healing, but his mind was not, as he was being captive and beaten for no reason except to be in a wrong place at wrong time. whereas the old inmate was wrestling with his own guilt while observing the stain on his wall, but he remained silent whenever other inmates inquired. The inmates in cell number 7 were busy, used to contemplate the significance of religion in the life of a sinner and its application in the real world till Mimo arrived back and everyone became saddened by his presence. But soon Mimo found happiness when he was allowed to visit the courtyard where he discovers caged pigeons resembling his own circumstances. But his fascination and childlike attitude made the other inmates question about his ability to commit such heinous crime that he was being accused for. Mimo freed the pigeon as if he freed himself, but in reality, he was being insulted and thrashed by others time to time as no one was able to understand his handicapped mind, while Ova was alone in the cave waiting for the one-eyed giant to arrive, but no one did except her grandmother and teacher, who explained to Ova that there was no point waiting idly and resume the school because sooner or later his father will arrive back to home. But Mimo was not going to come back any soon, as the court concluded based on the fabricated evidence presented by the general that Mimo committed a murder and thereby sentenced to be hanged till death. But he was not able to understand the ramifications of the judgment, but her grandmother in the courtroom broke down in tears and sadness, which made Mimo realize that something really bad is going to happen to him. The teacher Minnie promised to Ova to take her to prison for visiting his father arrived at the gate, but the guards refused to let her in along with the grandmother and Ova. Minnie resisted and showed the warden's approval, but the guard also remained adamant till the warden, who was about to leave in his car, saw the ruckus and decided to intervene. He immediately recognizes Minnie, who introduced him to Mimo's grandmother and her daughter Ova. But Ova had already left and went further towards a prison wall and started screaming his father's favorite phrase, "Lingo, lingo." She did for a while, but no response till Mimo replied, "Bottles." The intensity of her screams increases as Mimo also decreases the distance between them, but he was not able to reach her on the other side of the wall. The separation between them was now only remained of the physical nature, as their hearts were still pretty much connected as they couldn't be caged in the man-made prisons. This heartbreaking scene melted the heart of the warden outside, as well as the other inmates residing with Mimo inside. They started consoling him subtly after witnessing the unrelenting love of a father towards his child. Later at night, the guards smuggled the musical instrument requested by Senjez, whereas Ova was overwhelmed with sadness of not being able to meet his father and starts contemplating if something were to happen to the grandmother, then who would take care of her? But the grandmother assured that she will be alive till she grows up. In the cell, Mimo was welcomed by other inmates to sit with them and enjoy the music played by Senjez. Everyone had a lot of questions as well, so they start asking Mimo about his life and family, while Mimo, according to his limited cognitive ability, replied the best he could, and more inmates started believing that he was not able to commit a murder. After partying, when everyone was asleep, Senjez followed the inmate leader Arkurozlu to the washroom and threatened him with a knife as he was asked from someone outside to kill him. But Mimo intervened and grabbed Senjez with all his strength, but ended up getting hurt by the knife. The other inmates woke up and controlled the situation, while Arkurozlu realized the sacrifice Mimo made in order to save his life. That's why he pledges with the other inmates that he will smuggle Mimo's daughter inside the prison no matter what to repay the debt he owed now. He arranged a visitation with his acquaintance outside and hatches a plan, and succeeded in bringing Ova inside the prison along with his wife. Ova was kept hidden inside the tea trolley and smuggled all the way to Mimo's cell, where everyone was aware but the Ova's visit except her father. Ova came out from the trolley and Mimo was laid in his bed, and as soon as he was called out by her, he immediately forgot all his pain and worries and therefore hugs and kisses her for quite a while. At the home, the grandmother discovers a chit written by Ova that she is going to visit Mimo. It made her frightened, and therefore she started to run, but she was frozen as her body was not able to extend the same strength as her mind was. She fell down on the ground, pressing her hand on her heart to let it breathe for the sake of Ova and Mimo, but she died. Whereas Ova introduced herself to all the prisoners while everyone was already a bit overwhelmed by her presence, as they have never witnessed such innocence for a long time inside prison. Everyone gathered around her while explaining to her the situation that's keeping Mimo here. They equated being in prison to having an illness which gets healed in this place. But Ova was not ready to accept that yet, so she started asking around everyone about their illness and which made them accept the flaws they had while living in the society. Everyone accepted Ova's reflections on themselves, except the old inmate who remained silent. But as soon as Ova identified a tree which resembled the stain on the wall that keeps his attention occupied for most of the time, he decides to speak and revealed that his only flaw is to believe the people who lied the most. Everyone was flummoxed, as they haven't heard a detailed answer to any question by the old inmate. The news about the grandmother's death reached to the teacher, who immediately called the warden and revealed that Ova is in prison. The consequent news also spread in the cell that the warden is about to visit along with his guards in search of Ova, which turned the atmosphere panicky, and they hid Ova under the bed in haste. But the warden immediately discovered the whereabouts of Ova, as he was aware about the mental condition of Mimo, who disclosed everything to him. But Warden was also forced to realize Arkoroslu that a person who cannot hide a lie for a minute, then how can he murder someone in a second? The warden takes Ova back to the teacher, who shared the news of the grandmother becoming an angel, and it broke her heart, along with the warden, who was already wrestling with his conscience with whatever he has been witnessing himself about the personality and nature of Mimo. He decides to intervene and therefore visited the caves described by Ova where she saw the witness. Upon visiting, he was not able to find the man, but he successfully manages to recover his army uniform. The warden's doubts were vanished as he also started believing of Mimo's innocence, and he confronted the army officer Farouk in the jail to help him save the life of an innocent man. But Farouk cautioned him about the consequences of going against the general, but the warden convinces that he cannot sit idle while they let this travesty of justice happen on his watch. The old inmate was contemplating the prospects of suicide in the eyes of God, as the burden of burying his daughter was overwhelming for him. The other inmate advises him not to let his mind astray in the prison and helps him realize that waste of life is never an answer for cleansing your conscience or soul. Whereas Ova was sad due to the sudden death of her grandmother, coupled with the captivity of his father, while her teacher took her in and tries to console her with her own experience with her father who died a long time ago, and therefore, although she cannot share the pain of Ova, but was acutely aware of the emptiness that she feels inside of her. While everything was breaking apart, Arkoroslu, after witnessing the love between Mimo and Ova, decides to gather his family, where he was not able to resist his tears when he was visited by his sons and daughters. He accepted his past mistakes to his wife and also assured them of a bright and blissful future. The next day, Ova again visited Mimo and revealed about the passing away of his grandmother, and he starts crying while other inmates were also sad by this news. But at the other hand, Farouk's colleagues managed to find out the witness hiding away and therefore arrested him. While they informed him about this, but he along with the warden was not able to reach on time, as this news also spread to the general's office. And he decides to intervene, and that's why he called out to the witness in the open, while shot him in cold blood. Farouk and the warden were taken aback by this incident, and this news also spread to the entire cell except Mimo, who was slowly realizing that his end was near while observing the preparations of his punishment. The smallest amount of doubts were also diminished when he was called out by the warden to meet Ova along with their teacher. Mimo was sad, and Ova recognized it in his voice, but she was unaware about the reason, as everyone was promising to her till this point that her father will be coming back any time now. But Mimo didn't want her to live in a lie and courageously confronted her about the expected demise that's awaiting him. She started crying along with his father Mimo till they were separated by the guards, who were also feeling a strange guilt they were all sharing with each other. At last, Mimo was suited and said his last goodbyes to everyone who were crying while witnessing this inhumane act right before their eyes. But soon after, Mimo was taken by the guards to the hang post and was condemned to death for a murder he could not commit. The warden decided to share the news himself to Ova along with Farouk, and they start finding the right words but couldn't, so the warden handovers a little box that was being told by someone to give it to her. But miraculously, 2 nights ago, the old inmate decided to intervene and reveals his plan with the other inmate and Arkoroslu. He offered to die instead of Mimo because he doesn't want to live already after the death of his daughter, and if his death could reunite another daughter with his father, then he might have a chance to meet her own in the heavens. Since then, the plan to rescue Mimo was hatched and initiated by the inmates along with the help of the warden and Farouk. The old inmate also greeted goodbyes like Mimo, but he was the one who was taken to the hangpost while Mimo was hidden away in Farouk's jeep the entire time. Mimo was taken to Ova, who comes out from the back of the jeep screaming, "Lingo! Lingo!" while Ova joyously replied, "Bottles!" Later, they were shipped out from the country by the warden and Farouk to avoid any suspicion whatsoever towards Mimo. Both Ova and Mimo happily rode off in the boat as the place that occupied them was not able to accept them, as the meaning of family was limited, and therefore haunted many men to commit heinous acts in the name of their loved ones. If you liked our video or have any recommendation or suggestions, so please comment below. Till next time.